Good afternoon and welcome to the Lunchtime Series with me, Kevin Britz, leading the charge with insights, information, ultimately effective results. Joining me today in our leadership and coaching segment, we have someone all the way from the US. He's a doctor who's been, who is building great leaders through science. And I'm going to leave it to him to give us more information. But please welcome to the show, Dr. Tom Collins. How are you doing, Tom?
Yeah. Thanks, Kevin, for having me. Doing well. Happy to be here. Looking forward to our conversation. It's going to be a fun time.
So, Tom, when we previously spoke, we obviously unpacked a lot of information around leadership, but I mean, you've done a bit of a journey from, I'm assuming you still do it, but as a pediatric cardiologist and professor of pediatrics, and you've got this whole leadership thing going, and you've done so much research to support that. Don't you just want to give us a little bit of insight about you, where you come from, and what that journey has been like? Because it's quite a fascinating connection you've got.
Yeah, sure. Thanks for the opportunity. I am a pediatric cardiologist, which means that I take care of children who are born with or who develop heart problems in childhood, but also take care of those who grow up and who have heart problems that they were born with. So what we call adult congenital heart disease. And I've been doing that for about 20 years. And sometime around 2018, I decided that I would really start improving my leadership capabilities and started pursuing that just in my spare reading time. Did a lot in that area and got more excited and interested in it. Saw it as really valuable. Did a master's degree. I'm a scientist and do research in pediatric cardiology, and so I just moved that over to the leadership space because I was interested in that and had questions that developed, and one thing led to another, and I started moving my career more into that area, and then have done some really, I think, exciting and important studies in this space of leadership.
Yeah. And I mean, it's fascinating going from, dealing with children, and I think that's a special gift for people to be able to do that, because my heart just breaks when when kids are not okay. And moving all the way to leadership. But don't you want to give us some insight of what we are chatting about today? Because I mean, I know you've done the research, and you've done some wonderful investigation into the 4-star generals and admirals that you've spoken to about leadership, and that's sort of given you some really great insights on what you write about in your research.
Sure, yeah. So in 2020 or so, I started getting this idea for a book that I wanted to read, because by that point I'd read about 200 leadership books and felt like I knew what was out there commercially, but there was a book that I wanted to read, and it harkens back to, I was in the military for about 12 years, and so it drew on that. But it was the leadership perspectives of 4-star, the highest ranking U.S. military leaders, and that book was not out there. And so I was interested in reading a book that was from their perspective, that told their experiences and stories, but synthesized it all in a scientific manner that was really approachable. And so I started to try to figure out, how do you get in touch with a 4-star general or a 4-star admiral, right? Because these people are in very rarefied air. Most of them are not available readily to the general public, because they are high-profile people who have been in significant spaces in history and with regards to geopolitical things. And so, but I was able to do that and started building a network of them, and ultimately ended up interviewing 51 on the record, 52 off the record, but 51 4-star generals and admirals. And I asked them all the same 4 questions. What are the 3 most important leadership lessons that you learned across your career? And most of these people had been, in leadership positions in the military for at least 36 years, some as high as like 48, I believe it was. Led 140,000 people on average, with budgets north of $12 billion a year. But 3 most important leadership lessons you learned across your career. Can you give me examples of how those played out? So got them to tell me the stories of what that looked like. Leadership lesson you learn the hard way. So how did you screw this up? How do you want to be remembered as a leader, which really gets at their legacy, what they think is really deeply important about themselves and their leadership. And then 5 leadership maxims you always try to keep in mind. So recorded all those, synthesized, analyzed, codified, all these sorts of things, and produced a leadership framework that is going to be in my forthcoming book called The 4 Stars of Leadership. So
And I mean,
tremendously important and impactful experience for me. So,
and like the immediate question is, what is the most surprising insight that you took away from speaking to 52, high profile generals, leaders at that capacity? The role that they lead with and the position they hold is the gravitas of what it comes with is enormous. Was there some surprising insight that you actually discovered from them?
I think that some of it was having been in the military and having some idea of these people. It was reaffirming to me, but it would be surprising to those who are not in a military context or background. So the 4 big components, pillars of this leadership framework that came out of the study: character, competence, caring, and communication. And I think that for a lot of people who have no experience with military, caring is a crazy idea. Like, they wouldn't imagine that a 4-star general would care about the people that they lead. And I think that's informed incorrectly by perhaps what's in movies or things of that nature, right? So you watch a movie, they can't show you necessarily the 6 months, 5 years, however long it took to build a relationship with someone, so that when the moment comes and you say, I need you to charge into this bunker and risk your life, that you're willing to do it. All they can show you to keep you in the seats and interested in their movie is the explosions and the moment that somebody's yelling at someone else, charge into the bunker, right? But there's all this buildup that isn't shown in most cases, where it is caring and it is the character of these people that makes you want to follow them, to trust them, and to be willing to even sacrifice the ultimate in your life to do that, right? And so I think for a lot of people, that's going to be totally surprising, because they don't think of it that way. They think with command and control, and that's not what it is. It may be that for certain people lower down in the hierarchy of the military, but to get to that very top level, you have to have a certain amount of capabilities and character to get there. And so those people that are command and control, they get weeded out far below.
Yeah. And I think that's such an important point, because caring, it's instrumental in having great leadership, because there is an element of caring. And if you're asking someone to do something that's not comfortable, and that's probably life-threatening to many of these leaders that you mentioned, a certain amount of caring and relationship building is obviously going to be at the forefront of how to do that.
That's exactly right, because it is imperative in the development of human relationship. Ultimately, leadership is about my ability to influence someone else to achieve a common goal. And so influence, there's a huge impact of trust that goes into being able to influence someone toward that common goal. And trust is predicated on, do I believe that this person can get the job done? Do they know what they're doing? Do I trust that they actually have my interest in this common goal? Do I trust them as a person? Do they care who I am or what I'm about? Or am I just a pawn in their game? If it's the latter, then I'm highly unlikely to follow that person, to trust them. And so caring really is a foundational block in building those relationships that allow us to actually have meaningful leadership, whether it's with one person or large organizations. If people don't think that we care about them, they're not going to care about what we are hoping to accomplish.
But as you speak through it now, like one of the things that I've noticed to a large degree, you touch on trust and influence, and very often caring feels different than trust and influence, especially when you speak about it in a leadership capacity. And many leaders that I would ask, do you care about the people that you work with? Do you care what happens to them? Is there an element of caring in how you approach scenarios, situations, and outcomes that you actually wanting to reach? And probably 9 out of 10 times, I don't come across leaders who take that approach.
That's probably why a lot of people I would say in leadership positions, so I try to differentiate between leaders and managers and people in leadership or administrative roles from real leaders, right? But I think how many organizations fail? Maybe 9 out of 10 in the long run, right? Like it's only those that are built on lasting principles that endure, right? So I think that what we see, and my observation is that it's driven a lot by the mentality, the short-term mentality, the quarter, meeting your numbers for a quarter out of New York or other sort of places. Certainly we've done a great job of infecting the rest of the world with that mentality from the US, that your quarterly numbers are what matter. It's producing some increase in the stock number, no matter whether that's real or fabricated, so that stockholders are excited and they buy more stock and your price goes up and all that sort of thing. And that's a short-term answer to what needs to be a much longer-term approach. And so I think that what you're hitting on, Kevin, is that, yeah, those people that you meet and they don't have that attitude of caring, it's because they see people as a disposable commodity.
Yeah.
And that's absolutely not true. If you want people to do all the great things that people make noise about, innovate, create, move the ball forward, they need to be involved in what you're doing. They need to feel like somebody cares about them and where they are, because that develops what Amy Edmondson has written about, psychological safety. Once you feel like you're in a place where people aren't going to take advantage of you, they care not only for you by giving you a desk and a chair and a computer and a salary and all, but about you, what are your goals and dreams and your capabilities, then you're going to invest that in the endeavor. But until that happens, you're going to withhold. And that withholding is probably the greatest loss of most organizations, because all that capability that their people have, they're not getting nearly what they could be getting because those people are withholding, because they don't trust that you're going to treat them fairly, that when they come up with an idea, that you're not going to claim that it was yours. Right?
Yeah.
You're not. So I think that there's so much that goes into that. I mean, it's an incredibly important thing, and I think that also plays into what we see with regard to, I don't know about other countries right now. I have a general sense, but in the United States, we're facing huge issues with professional burnout, disengagement, lack of fulfillment, and the science is very clear that what we're talking about right now is vitally important on those fronts.
High-performing teams don't just happen, they're built. And at the core of every successful team is a contagious identity. It's more than teamwork, it's a mindset. It's about creating a culture where collaboration is second nature, innovation thrives, and every member steps into their true potential. When teams embrace the correct mindset and contagious identity, they tap into something bigger, a shared purpose, aligned values, and an unstoppable moment that drives high-performing teams. Because when identity is contagious, every team member plays with passion and owns their impact, and thrives in an environment where growth isn't just expected, it's inevitable. A contagious identity is where power meets transformation. For more information, go to kevinbritz.com.
One of the things that you write in your book, The 4 Stars of Leadership, and you outline these characters of all these pillars of character, competence, caring, communication. Which of these do you think that leaders struggle with the most, and why do you think that?
Yeah, I think that's a little bit of a sort of tricky question, in that I think it depends on the person and it depends on the context. If we, some people have issues with character. Other people have issues with the ability to care. Some people can't communicate very well. You may have someone who has, let's say, high functioning autism spectrum disorder. Their communication may be impaired. They may be really bright. They may be a person who has a lot of character. They may even care. It's just a difficulty with the ability to convey that. And so I think that it really depends on the person. And this gets to some work that I'm now beginning to do based out of this study that we're talking about, where I think that there are different archetypes, so that one person may be really good in 3 and weak in 1. Other people may be weak in 2 and good in 2. And depending on that combination, then you become a certain kind of archetype. But that gives us opportunities for growth and development, so that everybody can improve and be greater leaders in those ways.
Yeah, and I'm just, as you speak, I'm writing down, depending on the person and context, each scenario and situation is going to be contextually driven, and, a profound or someone who really just has great insights to leadership usually understands that, depending on the person, depending on the context, and sometimes even depending on the content that you're sharing, it's going to dictate how you show up as a leader and how you show up in your environment.
Right. I think we have to be conscientious of that very thing. How are we showing up right now? How do we show up when we're the person who's at the head of the table? And how do we show up when we're not the person who's at the head of the table? Because there's certainly people who are sycophantic, right? Like they're trying to tell their boss whatever makes the boss happy, and they may throw other people under the bus. They may claim other people's work, but then in a different context, they function completely differently. And so I think that's that integrity, which gets to character, but that integrity, that is, unification of our thoughts and, what we really think, what we say, and what we do. I think is vitally important too.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, Tom, you work in you work in a high pressure environment. You've interviewed and spoken to leaders in high pressure environments from healthcare and military backgrounds. What do you think? How can leaders in a high pressure field, at least, maintain their character and values, and what do you think adds to that? Because I'm assuming that in certain environments, and I would never even begin to imagine what that means, especially in a military environment, and I'm just thinking now in healthcare as well, when lives are on the line. How do you maintain, good character and values under such immense and intense pressure?
I think there are a number of things that we have to really do to create the likelihood of operating with character. The first is we have to determine to do so. And that sounds simple enough, but it really is. Having set in your mind, if a certain kind of situation arises, this is what I'm going to do. It's a little bit like people who are trying to maintain a healthy lifestyle and eat right. If somebody presents me with cheesecake, I will say, no, thank you. Right? If you have that ahead of time, then you're much more like, people have studied this, you're much more likely to actually push the cheesecake away. So if you're presented with a situation where it's, if I am tempted to take credit for someone else's work, I will be sure to give them credit. Creating those sorts of frameworks, going through that beforehand, so that, okay, when that moment arises, this is the if-then sort of thinking that you've established. That's one thing. The second thing is having accountability, having someone else who's willing and able, that you allow to, you've empowered to speak into your circumstance. Accountability is really good because it brings in social pressure, right? To help us behave the way we say we want to behave. And so I think that's a second thing. So many of the 4-stars that I talked to, they were in very high ranking positions. And so General Jim Mattis said, there's nothing so close to a god on earth as a general on a battlefield. And that's probably the most striking, quote that came from my study, about 300,000 words. Those were the ones that hit me the hardest. And what he was saying was, when you're in battle, when you're the leader and you say something, it carries this immense weight. You need to know what you're saying, and you need to know that it's the right thing to be said. And he talked about surrounding himself with people who didn't care about his rank, who would say, hey, that's the wrong thing to do. We shouldn't be going in that direction, whatever it may be. And so that accountability, I think, is vitally important. So it's determine the course of action that you want to take, the kind of person you want to be, and then set up guardrails effectively. That's the way you do it, I think.
Yeah, and I was just, as you were speaking through it, I'm kind of going. You say, determined to do so, and that's almost ties into intent. Have the intention of what it is you're about to do, and I love the accountability factor, because irrelevant of the title, irrelevant of who's in your environment, you open yourself up to being held accountable to the decisions you make, and if it's a wrong decision, have people in your corner and in your team, in your tribe, that's willing to tell you you're making bad decisions. And I think that's such an important part of having a good character, and one of the pillars, as you mentioned, to be able to, even in the face of making a bad decision, you're okay with someone telling you you made the wrong one.
Yeah that intentionality, as you said, I think in leadership in life, it seems like more and more people aren't particularly intentional. They just kind of float along, and whatever decision comes along, they make it based on that instant. Whatever's the most expedient, right? Like, this will get this off my plate. This is going to be the easiest thing. You have to be intentional, and you have to think about, if I make this decision, then what follows? What are the subsequent impacts that has, and the impacts beyond those impacts, right? And a lot of times we're not thinking that way. Certainly in our government here in the United States right now, there is little to no thinking beyond that moment. And the impacts are being felt across the globe because of that. And so intentionality is vitally important, and empowering the people, you kind of touched on, right? Having that tribe of people who can speak into your life and tell you directly. We all need that, because we all go astray. And it's having those people that can say, hey, no, remember, this is your goal. This is what you were hoping to do. Let's come back to that, right? I think everybody probably can think to a time in their life when they didn't live up to their ideals.
Yeah. And you mentioned the government, not to have a political conversation,
Right. Yeah, I don't usually like to talk about politics.
But I mean, there is a sentiment where, sometimes when you know what you don't want, you start realizing what it is you do want. And as you say, some people in leadership, and we have it in South Africa, we start recognizing the types of leadership that just simply isn't good enough. And I'm putting it out there to kind of go, perhaps that's what we sometimes need. We really need to understand what we don't want, so that we can actively pursue what it is we do want. Do you think that potentially is the case? Just as a bird's eye view and an opinion, perhaps, but also perhaps it's ego playing at its best in that circumstance, and when you recognize leadership that does that kind of thing.
Yeah, I mean, I think that maybe I'll say a definite maybe. Why I say that is there are so many. It seems to me there's so many permutations of how to get this wrong that it could take a really long time to run through all those to figure out what it is that you really want, from someone to get it right. I think that it's reminds me of I have a lot of people that I mentor and help build their careers and things and coach and whatnot. And what I tell a lot of young people who are in medicine who are trying to figure out what do they want to do, right? Like what is their specialty? Where are they going to go? I will usually say, you need to figure out what you can live with. That is, what are the bad things that you can tolerate, and what you cannot live without. If you can sort out those two things, hey, I need this in my life every single day. I cannot live without it. This over here is a pain. I don't like it so much, but I can live with it. If you can sort those things out, then you're in a league that has very few people, because you now know what is really at the core of what you need to be doing. I think a lot of times people don't do that. They sort of think, oh, well, this seems okay. I think I could do this. And I think the same is with leadership. This person seems okay. Maybe I could tolerate that. That thing there drives me completely insane. Yes, this person has a total lack of character and is incompetent, but maybe they make me feel good. Maybe that total incompetence and lack of character isn't so bad. No. Step back and think of what must you have. And I think that if people operated a little bit more in that mindset, it probably would be more successful.
Yeah, absolutely. And I love that it's so, you make it sound so simplistic, and I think that's a really good approach to kind of go, what are you willing to live with, and what are you not willing to, or what can you live without? Like having some kind of measurements of things like, okay, this is definitely something I want to live with, and something that I can't live without. It really just starts clarifying things a little bit more easily when making decisions like this. But I mean, one of the things that's just shifting gears, into your leadership, because you do so much, and balancing between being a pediatric cardiologist, a leadership researcher, and an entrepreneur. How do you balance that? Because that in itself, takes quite a skill.
Well, thanks. Thanks for the compliment, I think. The question is, am I balancing it very well, I guess, but let's assume that I am. I think that there are a number of things that people have asked me this sort of question for a long, long time, because I'm a highly efficient person, And so they asked me, how do I do all these things and so forth, without going insane and, and still maintaining sleep and family time and all this sort of stuff. And it is, I think that what I've been able to do in a lot of ways is to do multiple things. Let me rephrase that. To do one thing that has multiple outcomes that I'm seeking.
Yeah.
Okay. So for instance, this idea that I had with regard to, so when I was doing my master's, I was doing my master's in leadership. I got this idea for a study to create an instrument that differentiates between leadership and management, so that I can give you this instrument that I created and we validated, and I can know when I say leadership, Kevin thinks more about leadership, or maybe he thinks more about management, and the two are distinctly different. So anyway, I created this thing, and that served the purpose of basically being what could be referred to as my master's thesis. It was my large project that I had to turn in at the end of the master's, but it also translated into a scientific publication that my academic institution really likes me to have produced. And oh, by the way, it helped me to further my visibility and expertise in the domain of leadership, right? So it hit on all these points, and it was a single thing that I did. And so I think that a lot of times I'm able to identify those. How do I do that? Intentionality and thoughtfulness before I just dive in most of the time. How can I hit 3 or 4 birds with one stone with this sort of operation? So that, I think that's probably the biggest secret or key or what have you for how I've been able to balance these things.
Yeah, I mean, it's such a fascinating way of thinking about it, because you get to focus on the one thing that gets to impact a lot of areas that you, and it also, from a human being's perspective, I'm assuming that gives a lot of variety and brings a lot of variety. So it's ties into a purpose, and it ties into a mission for you, but yet allows for enough creativity and variety for your life.
Yeah, you just hit on something, Kevin, that I think is really important. This sense of purpose, right? Like, where do you want to go? Perhaps a lot of people aren't very efficacious with their endeavors because it's a one-time thing. They don't see that it's part of a bigger story, a bigger timeline, a strategy to get them to whatever they're really supposed to be doing, right? And for me, I figured out, why am I here? What am I supposed to be doing in life? And then once I figured that out, I passed through these things through this lens of purpose, of what am I supposed to be doing? Does this make any sense? If it doesn't make any sense, do I need to be doing it? Maybe I want to do it because it's fun. Okay. Hey, that'll be fun, and I'll really get some enjoyment out of that. It won't necessarily drive me toward purpose, but for most things, how does this fit into what I'm supposed to be doing? Because that will give me the fuel when it's hard, when I got to keep slogging, whatever it may be, to keep going and keep, the thing alive and get it finished. So I think that's probably another thing that I work with those people that I mentor and coach, is I take them through an exercise. We're going to work on trying to figure out what your purpose is, and then once they have that, they can start framing out, okay, does this make sense? Hey, that's a shiny nickel over there. Is it worth even bothering with? Because there may be just around the corner $1, right? Or whatever it may be. So.
Yeah. Absolutely. We started off with the 4 pillars, but if we circle back to the outline of the 4 pillars of the character, competence, caring, and communication, if you were to just distill that down to some of the key takeaways for today's conversation, like what would that be, and what should future leaders out there consider when considering these 4 pillars that you speak about?
Yeah, I think they're networked in the sense that you need all 4 of them. If you sacrifice one of them, then you're not going to be the kind of leader that you could be, that your people deserve, that the mission that you're trying to accomplish, the goal you're trying to accomplish, is worthy of. You may think that you can skimp on character. Look at Enron. That didn't pan out so well, right? There are examples that we can use for any of these things. For competence, somebody was incompetent when it came to O-rings on the Space Shuttle Challenger, okay? And that ended very poorly. Caring. We can look at all the despots across human history, whether current or otherwise, and look at the outcome for millions and millions of people when the leader didn't care about them. And communication, you may have the greatest character, you may know everything there is to know and be able to do everything there is to do and care deeply about people, but if you cannot communicate any of those things to people, you're not going to be able to influence them to help you. And if it's only you doing the thing, you're not going to get very far. The adage is, if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together.
Yeah.
And so I would say that understand that these 4 pillars are pillars. You take one away, it collapses. And we all need to work on that. And we all can get better in each of those domains.
Absolutely. I love that. If it's and it ties definitely. And I love that you say they're all connected in such a big way and they work well together. So knowing, and really reflecting on your character, competence, caring, and communication, because it's an obvious go-to. And Tom, just to lead the listeners to kind of connect with you, because I go to your website, and you have the Science of Leadership podcast as well. If people want to find out more about you, about the books you've written, and I mean, where are the quickest ways for us to find out more about you?
Yeah, so you hit on the Science of Leadership podcast. We do that. We release weekly episodes of that, and we basically take one leadership principle that falls somewhere within the 4, stars of leadership: character, competence, caring, communication. And we focus on that. We talk about that typically with someone who's a really high profile leader, highly accomplished, or a leadership researcher who's published a lot, important books and things in this space. And we drill down on it. And okay, what is this thing? Why is this thing important? What does the science say? And then what are the practical points? What are the take homes that people can start doing today to translate to being more effective with their leadership? So the Science of Leadership, definitely, we're on most all the audio platforms, and we have a YouTube channel where we post the video podcast, and then derivative videos, shorter videos that really hit on high key points. www.4starleaders.com is our website, and so that's actually going through some iteration right now, and will be revamped soon. But that's a place where all of this information, whether it's the book that's coming out, the podcast, some writings that I'm doing, sort of blog-like thing. I don't like the word blog, so I refer to them as articles, but those are there, as well as things like coaching and leadership seminars and trainings and things that I do. So
fantastic. And absolutely, we'll definitely put all those links in the description boxes below. He's a pediatric cardiologist and a professor of pediatrics, a doctor who is building great leaders through science. Dr. Tom Collins, thank you for spending some time with us and unpacking this incredible insight around the 4 pillars to leadership. And thank you for joining us today, and we look forward to connecting with you soon.
Thanks, Kevin. It's been great.